You wake to the thunder of hooves, striking wet cobblestones, their rhythm sharp against the muffled hum of the slumbering city. The air is thick, the acrid scent of olive oil lamps still burning, mingle with the sour breath of the Tiber as it snakes through Rome's heart. It is the year 48 A.D., deep in the folds of the night, and you crouch in the shadows of a marble alcove within the imperial palace. Your back presses against the cool stone, the rough weave of your tunic snagging on an unseen crack. Beyond a veil of silk curtains which sway like restless spirits in the draught, the palace murmurs of forbidden life. Hushed laughter, sharp gasps, the clink of goblets, the rustle of silk, sound of a world that does not see you, and would crush you if it ever did. Your pulse races. You are a servant, invisible and disposable, but close enough to catch the whispers that shift empires, close enough to see her. Valeria Messalina, the empress herself. She slips past the curtains, cloaked and hooded, her dark eyes burning with a fire that feels almost alive. She moves like a predator, like someone who believes the entire city belongs to her, and in many ways it does. You watch her vanish into the night, unaware that you have seen something dangerous, something that could cost you your life before the dawn breaks over the Palatine hill. This is not a story of marble statues and distant names in dusty scrolls. This is the Rome that breathes, that bleeds. It is a city where power is sharp as a blade, where secrets live longer than men, and where a single rumor could carve your name into history or into a gravestone. Gather closer. Let the flames of our tale warm your imagination. Let us step back to the beginning and follow Messalina's rise to the glittering, treacherous corridors of power. Valeria Messalina was born around 20 A.D., into a family where ambition and bloodline twisted together like ivy climbing Rome's ancient walls. Her father, Marcus Valerius Messalina, was a consul, descendant of men whose triumphs were carved into the annals of the Republic. Her mother, Domitia Lepida the Younger, came from the highest tiers of nobility, sister to the father of Nero, cousin to Caligula. Even as a child, Messalina breathed power as naturally as air. Her earliest memories were gilded with luxury, the heavy summer heat baking terracotta rooftops, the soft whisper of slaves' bare feet over mosaic floors, the sweetness of figs arranged on silver trays. From the gardens of the Palatine, fountains threw arcs of water into the sun, breaking the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows over marble statues of gods and nymphs. At night, the wind off the Tiber carried the smells of baked bread from the Subura and the sour, inevitable rot of fish pulled from the river's muddy banks. Childhood in Rome's elite circles was fleeting. Alliances were currency, and every glance, every word was a calculation. By 38 A.D., perhaps at 18 years old, Messalina was bound by marriage to Tiberius Claudius Drusus. Claudius, a man nearly 30 years her senior. Claudius was no ordinary groom. Among the elite, he was a man of contradictions, mocked for his limp, his stammer, the tremor at the corner of his mouth, yet also a scholar of relentless focus, ink staining his hands from long nights bent over scrolls. His own survival through the bloody intrigues of the Julio-Claudian line had been earned not by ambition, but by invisibility. While his relatives schemed in gilded chambers, Claudius buried himself in histories, in words, in the safety of quiet. Their wedding was not a union of hearts, but of dynasties. Under a canopy of silk, priests droned their blessings, incense hung heavy in the air, and guests in embroidered togas whispered the power their union secured. The marriage produced heirs quickly. In 39 or 40 A.D., a daughter, Claudia Octavia, her mother's dark, searching eyes swallowed in Tyrian purple. By 41 A.D., a son, Tiberius Claudia Germanicus, later called Britannicus, was born even as Rome trembled on the edge of chaos. For in that same year, the Emperor Caligula was struck down in a palace corridor. His blood pooled on cold stone. Torches sputtered, and in the echoing silence that followed, Claudius was discovered trembling behind a curtain. The Praetorian Guard, armor clanking in the darkness, hauled him forth and proclaimed him emperor. Whether from fear or hunger for stability, the Senate bent to their will. And so, at barely 21, Valeria Messalina found herself Empress of Rome. The imperial palace was a paradox, marble and gold, splendor and shadow. By torchlight, its halls gleamed like the temples of gods, But in every corner, in every quiet chamber, the whispers of betrayal coiled like smoke. Messalina learned quickly. She moved through the palace with a predator's grace, silk hems brushing past frescoes of Venus and Adonis. Her laughter rang bright, but behind her smile was calculation. She aligned herself with Claudius's most cunning freedmen, men like Narcissus, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, and Pallas, whose wealth and influence rivaled senators. They drafted edicts, whispered accusations, and built her power one quiet maneuver at a time. Tacitus, in his annals, would later call her a force of ambition, a mind as sharp as any blade concealed in a senator's cloak. In 42 A.D., her gaze fell on Appius Junius Silanus, a noble senator of striking reputation. She wanted him, and she was not a woman used to hearing the word no. But Silanus, perhaps sensing the danger of her favor, turned her away. Rejection was something Messalina could not tolerate. She spun her trap with care, her voice low and urgent in Narcissus's ear. By dawn, Claudius, pale and blinking under the dim light of a single lamp, had been convinced of a plot. The order was given. Silanus was executed without trial, his blood staining the Gemonian stairs, that grim place where Rome displayed its traitors. At sunrise, the people muttered their fear and shuffled away, the weight of power pressing on their shoulders like a storm cloud. But Messalina's reach did not stop at politics. It bled into her desires, into the private corners of the palace, where even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Suetonius tells of Nestor, a Greek actor whose performances in the theater drew gasps and applause. Summoned to her chambers, he found himself caught in the velvet trap of her will, the air perfumed with rose water, curtains drawn to keep the world out, her voice a mixture of seduction and threat. To refuse her was unthinkable. To comply was survival. Her power was intoxicating, and her jealousies just as fierce. In 41 A.D., Julia Livilla, sister to the slain Caligula and rival in beauty, was exiled to the barren island of Pandateria. There, the wind howled through empty hills, and hunger was a slow, grinding death. Livilla's smuggled letters spoke of cold nights, her hair matted, her body wasting under the pitiless sun, her once celebrated beauty reduced to a ghost. Rome, for all its grandeur, loved its gossip, and no name burned brighter in rumor than Messalina's. Satirists like Juvenal painted her as a creature of endless appetite, slipping into the Subura, the city's underbelly, in the dead of night, disguised as a common prostitute. They claimed she worked the brothels, straw scratching her skin, the air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and cheap wine, until dawn drove her back to the palace, her limbs heavy, her coin purse full, her hunger somehow unfulfilled. Pliny the Elder recorded an even more lurid tale, a contest of endurance, a challenge against Sylla, Rome's most infamous courtesan. Who could take more lovers in a single day and night? The story goes that Messalina triumphed, 25 men in a fever of excess, her body trembling with exhaustion, her breath ragged, as unseen crowds murmured in ignorant awe of their empress. Tacitus, more measured, cautions that such stories were often sharpened by her enemies. Yet even he could not deny the pattern of her recklessness, a recklessness that would, in time, become her undoing. Still, beneath the scandal and the power plays, there was a woman, the mother, who shielded her children from the venomous currents of the court. Britannicus, bright-eyed and book-loving like his father, chased lizards in the palace gardens, the scent of roses masking the poison of politics. Octavia, delicate and reserved, was quietly promised to noble bloodlines, her fate upon an alliances her mother carefully arranged. Claudius, meanwhile, was consumed by the conquest of Britain in 43 A.D., where legions slogged through cold marshes, standards raised high under gray skies. His absence left Rome in Messalina's hands. She held the reins of an empire and believed herself untouchable. But power in Rome was always a game of borrowed time. The year was 48 A.D., and Rome glittered like a jewel in the sun. From the Palatine hill, its temples and forums spread in every direction, marble columns reaching skyward, streets swarming with senators, soldiers, merchants, and slaves. The empire stretched to Britain's windswept cliffs, to the sand of Africa, to the hills of Judea, its roads like veins carrying tribute and conquest back to heart. And at the heart sat Valeria Messalina, empress, wife of Claudius, mother of his heirs, mistress of secrets, temptress of Rome. She was young, she was beautiful, she was untouchable, or so she believed. Her days were a dance between luxury and danger. In the palace, mosaics of gods sprawled across the floors. Frescoes of satyrs and nymphs laughed soundlessly from the walls. Servants moved like shadows, bearing trays of figs, pomegranates split open like wounds, and wine dark as spilled blood. But beneath the silk and music, Messalina's ambitions grew restless. Claudius trusted her implicitly, consumed as he was with imperial duties, legal reforms, and the distant conquest of Britain. She ruled in his absence, through alliances, through whispers, through men who thought themselves her equals until they found themselves exiled, ruined, or dead. And then came Gaius Silius, a consul designate, young, striking, with ambition burning in his eyes. Tacitus tells us that Messalina fell for him with the force of a summer storm. Soon, their affair was an open secret in Rome's gardens and porticos. They met in villas heavy with the scent of violets, where ivy curled around pillars like watching serpents. There, between silk couches and scattered rose petals, desire tangled itself with treason. For Silius was more than a lover. He was a man who dreamed of power. Together, they conceived a plan so reckless it feels like myth, to overthrow Claudius himself. The emperor was away at Ostia, inspecting grain shipments. Rome depended on its grain like lungs on air. A single delay meant riots in the forum, loaves of bread snatched from bakers by hungry mobs. While Claudius studied the cargo lists under the salty wind, Messalina and Silius staged what Tacitus calls a mock wedding. But it was no quiet betrayal. The ceremony burned with excess. Guests draped themselves in garlands of ivy and grapes. Musicians played shrill flutes. Wine spilled like rivers over marble floors. Messalina, veiled in bridal silk, laughed as though the empire itself were a stage for her pleasure. To some it was blasphemy, to others prophecy, a queen choosing her new king. In the midst of it, someone slipped away. Narcissus, the imperial freedman, the man whose pen had shaped decrees, whose whispers had ended lives, whose loyalty lay with Claudius alone. He saw treason where others saw revelry. Galloping through the night, wheels grinding against stone, he reached Ostia and poured the tale into the emperor's ear. Claudius listened in stunned silence. Betrayal is a slow knife. At first, you hardly feel the wound. The emperor returned under cover of darkness. His carriage jolted over uneven roads as the city slept, unaware that his ruler carried fury like a torch in his chest. At dawn, the Praetorians stormed Silius's house. What they found was chaos. Imperial treasures, gifts from Messalina, goblets overturned, petals crushed underfoot, lovers fleeing half-clothed through courtyards. Silius himself was seized, dragged before soldiers whose faces betrayed no emotion. Messalina ran. Tacitus writes that she fled to the gardens of Lucullus, those sprawling estates where cypress trees lined paths like silent judges. Her mother, Domitia Lepida, met her there. History lingers on this moment. A mother pressing a dagger into her daughter's trembling hands. The message was clear. In Rome, disgrace was often met with self-inflicted death, the final act of control in a life spiraling toward ruin. But Messalina hesitated. We imagine her on her knees in the cold grass, tears streaking her face, the blade shaking as the Praetorians closed in. Perhaps she hoped Claudius would forgive her, that love or habit or their children might soften him. No reprieve came. A tribune stepped forward. Steel flashed. The empress of Rome fell, blood darkening the earth beneath the cypresses. Back at the palace, Claudius dined in silence. When he asked about his wife's fate, the answer came flat, without ceremony. She is dead. The emperor gave no sign of grief. Tacitus says he listened, expressionless, as though the woman who had shared his bed, borne his children, ruled his empire in his absence, were already a ghost to him. The Senate decreed damnatio memoriae, her name erased from inscriptions, her statues toppled in forums and gardens, their marble faces shattering against the stones. Rome would pretend she had never lived at all. But history remembers. Oh, how it remembers. Messalina's death might have ended our tale. Scandal, ambition, betrayal, punishment, were it not for the darker truths pulsing beneath Rome's marble skin. For beyond the senators and empresses, beyond the poets sharpening their quills on imperial gossip, lay another Rome, a Rome of shadows, a Rome of the delicati. The pueri delicati, the delicate boys, they were not citizens, not nobles. Many were not even free. They were children, captives, slaves, some no older than 10, taken from villages in Gaul, from farms in Syria, from the cold forests of Germania, chosen for beauty, a curl of hair, the shape of a mouth, eyes wide with terror. They were sold in markets where flesh was priced like spices, like wine, like cattle. In the villas of the powerful, they became objects of desire. Suetonius tells us of Tiberius, the emperor before Caligula, retreating to his villa on Capri in 27 A.D. The cliffs there plunge like knives into a sea that crashes and roars, salt spray rising against sun-bleached stone. Amid terraces and pools, Tiberius kept his orchards. Boys and girls trained to please, their bodies oiled to gleam under torchlight, their movements choreographed like dancers before the emperor's hungry gaze. Some were mutilated to preserve their youth. Castration. The surgeon's knife cutting away any future, but the one Rome imposed, left scars deeper than flesh. Afterwards came the darkened rooms, the fevers, the slow return to service under eyes that saw them not as children, but as possessions. Seneca, the philosopher, thundered against such cruelty in his letters to Lucilius. He spoke of slaves whose smiles masked terror, who learned to endure nights of use and days of labor, who flinched at a raised hand, yet dared not weep where masters could see. But Rome was an empire of contradictions. Even as emperors like Domitian passed laws against castration, their own households glittered with eunuchs pouring wine at feasts, fanning guests with peacock feathers, their faces empty of childhood. The story of Sporus chills even now. During Nero's reign, this boy, said to resemble Nero's dead wife, Poppaea, was castrated on the emperor's orders. Then, in a mockery of marriage, Nero dressed him as a bride, veiled and perfumed, and paraded him to the streets of Rome as empress. Crowds watched in stunned silence as the boy walked beside the man who had taken his body, his future, his name. Rome built its glory on roads and aqueducts, on legions and laws, but also on bodies treated as things, as trophies, as play. And so the tale of Messalina and the tale of the delicati twined together, two vines climbing the same rotten wall. One shows us power at its most brazen, an empress defying an emperor until empire itself crushed her. The other shows us power at its most intimate, reaching into the lives of the powerless, leaving scars history barely recorded. Both speak of a world where desire ruled, where law and cruelty walked hand in hand, where even marble and triumph could not mask the cost paid in flesh and silence. When we leave Rome behind, its forums empty in moonlight, its statues staring with sightless eyes, the whispers remain. Messalina's laughter on the wind, the faint echo of marching feet, the names of children never written down. An empire lives on in stone and story, but its ghosts walk beside us, asking whether we have truly changed at all. By 117 A.D., Emperor Hadrian strengthened bans on castration. Philosophers railed against the trade. Laws multiplied, but demand never ceased. In the markets, buyers still prodded young limbs as though judging livestock. In villas, laughter still rose from banquets where boys poured wine with downcast eyes. On the frontiers, legionaries kept their own companions in tents that smelled of leather, sweat, and fear. Across the empire, from the steamy baths of Ostia to the distant estates of Africa, the pattern repeated. Boys taken in conquest, scrubbed in cold fountains, taught music, dance, obedience, and silence. Always silence. In Pompeii, graffiti scratched into bathhouse walls speak in broken Latin of longing, of bargains, of curses hurled at unnamed masters. These fragments are all that remain of lives lived beneath notice, beneath mercy. At banquets, Nero kissed him in public. At the games, he sat beside him as though beside a queen. When Nero fell in 68 A.D., Sporus was claimed by another powerful Roman, then another. Finally, facing life as the plaything of yet one more conqueror, he chose death over survival, a silent rebellion. the only freedom left to him,